Welcome back to the Brahmin Word, and we are wrapping up the book of Ruth today and just seeing how do we experience joy in the Christian life. And a big part of that was through the love story of Ruth and Boaz last chapter in Ruth chapter 3. We're going to wrap that up in Ruth chapter 4. So turn with me to Ruth chapter 4, verse 1. Now, as you may remember, there was another kinsman redeemer in Ruth's life in the family line of Naomi. However, if that kinsman redeemer decided not to redeem Naomi, then Boaz would take over. So let's see, how does Boaz, because we know the end of the story, Boaz marries Ruth, but how does he get to that point? So chapter 4, verse 1. Now Boaz had gone up to the gate and sat down there. And behold, the Redeemer, of whom Boaz had spoken, came by. So Boaz said, "Turn aside, friend, and sit down here." And he turned aside and sat down. So you may be thinking, okay, why do it here? Why not do this in like the synagogue? Basically, this is a very public space. The gate that's mentioned is possibly a city gate, possibly the city gate of Bethlehem. Basically, there are many, many witnesses involved in this quote unquote exchange of kinsman redeemership. Whereas in a synagogue, not only would there be less amount of people, but there would also be very specific type of people, like religious leaders. Whereas Boaz wants everyone to know what is happening between himself and the kinsman redeemer. That is not mentioned by name. So he gets him to sit down with him, and then they start talking together. Verse 2. And he took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, "Sit down here." So they sat down. So obviously, there's still more people involved in these 10 men, but the elders of the city is interesting. It's not religious leaders, but it's elders of the city. So my guess is it could be seniors, it could be city officials, something like that. That's who we're referring to in verse 2. Verse 3. Then Boaz said to the Redeemer, and again, I think the fact that he's not named is kind of like a foreshadowing to the point that Boaz is going to become the kinsman redeemer, because this guy isn't even named. So I think that's kind of why he's not mentioned by name. Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, is selling the parcel of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. So I thought I would tell you of it and say, but buy it in the presence of those sitting here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not, tell me that I may know. For there is no one besides you to redeem it, and I come after you. And he said, I will redeem it. So Boaz makes this very interesting, and he is very strategic about it as well. Not deceptive, just a very strategic person. Obviously, land or an estate is very, very valuable, and so the guy has this unknown kinsman redeemer has a lot of interest in owning this estate and this land, even if that means taking Naomi into his house and her just living there. Well, if you do that, then you get all of her land, you get her estate. Why wouldn't you do that? And so he says, I will redeem it. But then he adds the other part of it. Verse 5. Then Boaz said, the day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the widow of the dead, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance. Then the Redeemer said, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption yourself, for I cannot redeem it. So it's interesting to me, again, that he strategized in this way. Yes, the estate is very valuable. Yes, it's very appealing, but there is a part to it that, yes, it is Naomi's estate, but it's also her children's estate, and therefore, if her children had a spouse that if you buy the estate, you would also have to be responsible for the marriage of the widow. And it's not like this unknown redeemer, he just says that that would complicate things. However, look at the way that Boaz describes her, describes Ruth in verse 5. Not only does he describe her as the widow of the dead, which that's common, that's why you have this kinsman redeemer, but look how he describes her, the Moabite. The Moabite. And I think that is incredibly important. I think that's incredibly important to see as well, because he's distinctly saying that she is not a she's not from Israel, even though in chapter 1 she has basically turned to the God of the Jews and in that way become Jewish, but she's still known as a Moabite because that's where she comes from. And so that just messes up the inheritance of this unknown kinsman redeemer, and so he gives up that right. Now it's interesting to see how that exchange happens. Verse 7. Now this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning redeeming and exchanging. To confirm a transaction, the one drew off his sandal and gave it to the other, and this was the manner of attesting in Israel. So when the redeemer said to Boaz, "Buy it for yourself," he drew off his sandal. Then Boaz said to the elders and all the people, "You are witnesses this day that I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Chilion and Mahlon. Also Ruth the Moabite, the widow of Mahlon, I have bought to be my wife, to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off from among his brothers and from the gate of his native place. You are witnesses this day." Now, before we get to the witness's response, I want to make a couple things clear. Buying, when he says buying Ruth to be his wife, it's not a slavery kind of concept. It is, I have redeemed her from the fact that she was a widow. She is no longer a widow. She has a financial, economic future. And not only that, but she can have a familial future as well, which we'll see here at the end of the chapter. But there's hope that comes from this. And that is really, really, really cool to see. But I want to make that distinction clear. But this is just flooded with joy. And the thing that I want to point out too, the aspect of redemption. This is a really important part of the book of Ruth. Redemption is incredibly important. So, what does redemption mean? Redemption is the idea that you buy, that you're paying for something. That is the idea. Yeah, that is the idea of redemption. And we see this, of course, with Jesus. But it's to buy or get something back to recover as by paying a fee. And we see this when we're talking about this aspect with Boaz. It's important to realize that he's not just saying, "Oh yeah, I'll take on this responsibility with, and I don't have to pay anything." No, he does have to pay. Like, he has to pay for the estate. He has to pay for the marriage license. He has to pay for all that kind of stuff, and he pays out of pocket for it. But doing so, he's giving hope and joy to these two women, Naomi and to Ruth. And what a beautiful picture that is. But it really is pointing to Jesus. Obviously, the lineage of Ruth and Boaz, which we'll look at in a second, points to Jesus as well. But this idea of redemption in the life of Boaz and Ruth is pointing directly to Jesus, because Jesus redeemed us, paying a price, and that price is his life in order to recover something that is lost, which is you and I when we disobeyed the Lord by sinning or disobeying Him. And so he bought us back with his blood, with his life. He redeemed us. And you see just a glimpse of that here in the book of Ruth, and what a beautiful picture that is. And that should bring joy to your heart and to your life. And I hope it does, as it has me when I went through this book while I was being counseled for depression and anxiety. This chapter specifically gave me so much hope and so much joy. And I hope it does for you as well. However, let's wrap it up. Verse 11, let's see the response of the crowd. Then all the people who were at the gate and the 10 elders said, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel." Rachel and Leah, uh, and through their concubines as well, gave birth to 12 sons. Now they gave birth to other children, to daughters as well. They give birth to daughters also, but when it comes to the building up of the foundation of Israel, we talk about the 12 tribes of Israel. Those 12 tribes are directly linked to the 12 sons of Jacob, of Rachel, Leah, and their concubines, so they build up the house of Israel with their children. May you act worthily in Ephrathah and be renowned in Bethlehem, and may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, because of the offspring that the Lord will give you by this young woman. And I think it's interesting that they mention Tamar and Judah. Because that was born out of a very unique and very difficult situation where Tamar acted like prostitutes and slept with her father-in-law Judah, because Judah did not provide a kinsman redeemer for his daughter-in-law. And so it's interesting to see the contrast between Boaz and Judah, but it's interesting to see that distinction, because through the house of Perez, you have Jesus come forth. And so with that, they get married. Ruth and Boaz get married. So verse 13. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife, and he went into her, and the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. Then the women said to Naomi, again, Naomi, pleasant, "Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a redeemer, and may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him." What a great statement that is about the loyalty of Ruth, that it's worth more than 7 sons, and the financial security that they would give, but yet she is worth so much more because of her love and her loyalty for her mother-in-law, but also because of the joy that she brought back to Naomi's life, making her pleasant again, even though Naomi wanted to be called bitter. Yeah, just really, really cool thing to see. But then it gets even more, just even more cool, to be honest. Verse 16. Then Naomi took the child and laid him on her lap, and became his nurse. And the women of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, "A son has been born to Naomi." They named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. So not only is Naomi given joy back in her life, but she is given a grandson to look over and bring joy back into her life in that manner. And then, of course, the big one at the end of verse 17, the baby that was born, the son that was born to Boaz and Ruth, is the grandfather of David, of King David, who therefore is the great grandson of Ruth and Boaz. And that's really, really cool to see. And so let's break down the genealogy here at the end of the book. Now, these are the generations of Perez. Perez fathered Hezron, Hezron fathered Ram, Ram fathered Amminadab, Amminadab fathered Nahshon, Nahshon fathered Salmon, Salmon fathered Boaz, Boaz fathered Obed, Obed fathered Jesse, and Jesse fathered David. Now, you may be wondering, because that's the end of the book. That is the last verse. That this is the last chapter. So the question is, why end with a genealogy? One, I'll probably do a broad word on genealogies because I think they're incredibly helpful. But the why end this book with genealogy? In the same way that we see joy in the Christian life through the present trials and tribulations, and then the blessings that Ruth and Naomi experience, we also see joy in the Christian life with the future that God is planning for us that we can't even think about. And so again, the fact that through the through the very interesting interesting conception of Perez from his uh, from Judah and Tamar, Judah being the father-in-law of Tamar. They have Perez as a son. Well, that son is then the great ancestor of Boaz, who then marries a Moabite, a pagan, and yet through their marriage, the great grandson of their marriage is the future king of Israel, who then points to the future King of Kings, which is Jesus. And it's interesting that in the genealogies in the New Testament, very few women are mentioned, mainly because of the patriarchal culture and the passing down of responsibility from male to male. But yet there are women mentioned in the genealogy, and Ruth is definitely one of them. And the reason why, not just because she is a pagan and is used by the Lord to become a follower of Jehovah, of God, um, but because by all rights, she should have been quote unquote dead when it comes to being a widow, being in danger, being in with no hope of passing on her legacy to her children. Um, and yet, and yet the Lord provides. And what a beautiful picture that is. And not only provides, but then provides with uh, a grandson, a great grandson who becomes the king of Israel. So it's really, really cool to see that. And I love genealogy, so we'll get to that later. But with that, I hope you have seen just what it means to be joyful in the Christian life, to rest and to lean on the Lord no matter the circumstance. And what a beautiful picture that is. So I will see you next week. However, I'll see you with Brahmin Word tomorrow as well. Thanks.